Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome back again from the winter break. I think I'm still role-playing the Dark Ages without any power or electricity. So hopefully by today or tomorrow, I don't have to role-play anymore. So this has been a weird winter break for me, at least. Losing power in the first ice storm for like about 72 hours, and then getting it back for 2 days, and then losing it again till this point. So anyways, I hope you didn't have the bad luck as I did, and you had a more productive winter break compared to me. So anyways, this kind of reminds you that how much we're dependent on electricity as such, and I'm glad that I don't have an electric vehicle at this point. But anyways, we'll figure that out when we cross that road. So what I want to do today is we've been back after a while now, because we didn't have the second class before we went to winter break because of the bad weather. And the weather is pretty bad today as well. I mean, could have done online, but well, we don't have electricity at home. So here we are. Anyways, so I want to take the first half of the class answering any general or specific questions that any of you might have with respect to your phase 1 submissions. I believe many of the groups met with the TA during the winter break. So I believe you got some feedback from her. So if you have any kind of lingering questions regarding what you're doing, any generic questions about, if you're on the right track, or if you want to get some feedback from me, which could be generic in nature or specific to your project, as long as it is not technically related, I can answer them, right? And then in the second half of the class, we will kind of continue with our discussions from where we left off the last time, when we had started talking about the basics of the Amazon Web Services platform, and went through the different processes of signing up for a free tier account, setting up our own custom billing alarms. And in the process, we kind of got accustomed to 2 new services that AWS provides, which is basically CloudWatch, which is the monitoring services of AWS, and then the simple notification service, which is essentially used to send out alerts or any kind of messages to your subscribers if you have your cloud platform on AWS's organization, right? So anyways, to start off with, I will open the floor. Any questions that you may have, I will take them first. And after that, I will probably address some general points that kind of came up, and some students emailed me over the course of the winter break, which I can get back to. So any questions, go ahead. I will start answering them. Yes.
So we did email you about
Right.
the part in the projects where you mentioned about the data.
Right.
And we weren't really clear on what data you expect at the end of the project.
Okay, so take me through your questions one by one. So the first question is about what sort of data?
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay. All right. So data-wise is basically, it depends on the type of topic that you have selected. So specific topics have specific tabular data that could be available on industrial white papers. It could be available on internet searches, such as policy papers, any kind of governance papers that can be released with respect to that topic, any kind of news articles, blog posts of people who have done a survey that would give you some statistical information about the topic that you're working with. But of course, it is not universally applicable to all of the topics, right? Some topics will have more, let's say, statistical data. Some topics will have more linguistic data, right? So you need to kind of look into starting with academic papers first, because that is your easiest starting point going about it. And that's where you can find most of the data to get an understanding of what is happening in the state of the art. Because before you get to the point where you start analyzing, you need to get an understanding of what is happening there, right? So the best point to do that will be to start off with academic papers, followed by industrial white papers. So sometimes if any kind of specific industrial domains, whether that be the government, such as DoD is there, DARPA is there, or Air Force Research Lab, those kind of organizations, if they kind of utilize some of these particular domains in their ongoing projects and stuff like that, right? So they might release some kind of report or some kind of feedback as to what was the performance or what are the issues pertaining to that particular domain, right? So look into those policy papers, look into those industrial white papers. Sometimes organizations such as the companies who are researching that particular topic. Let's say if AWS is researching and trying to develop a service related to XYZ application, right, or XYZ research issue. So they will release a documentation saying that this is what we are trying to address. So that will give you some information as well. Followed by that particular avenue, that is industrial white papers or government policy papers and stuff like that. Look into individual articles by researchers or tech people who have given some kind of feedback of using that particular service that you're trying to research, or they have given some feedback with respect to the issue itself that they're trying to research, and trying to get more and more and dig more and more information about that. Now, when you dig that information from these different types of sources, right, and the sources, there is no restriction that, oh, you need to kind of restrict yourself to this avenue, right? It's not like, oh, I wouldn't go beyond academic papers. No, that's not the structure of this project, right? So once you get those data, on a general, overview, you will either find more quantitative data, depending on the type of project that you're doing, or you will find more qualitative data, which could be in the form of languages, right? So natural language processing is what you're going to be using, right? So that will inform the method that you need to use in order to analyze and kind of summarize in a collective way the information that you have gathered, and then convey that in a more concise fashion to your audiences, right? So that will inform the method that you need to further use in order to analyze it. And please remember, I'll talk about that. But anyways, does that clarify your question more or less?
Yeah. So in terms of virtualization, basically not all data would be able to virtualize it. For example, like policies and that stuff, like we're not going to be able to virtualize it in a graph, but it's like users and specific.
You can actually, because if you do linguistic processing, right, you can extract what they are trying to say. So that is basically taking qualitative data and converting or giving it a quantitative outlook. So you need to then research the different types of linguistic processing methods that are available in order to transform the linguistic data into qualitative perspective. Because think about it this way, the exercise, the overall goal is that if, let's say, your upper management tells you to find out more about this particular issue and inform them, right? That meeting is going to be a short one. Short in the sense, probably you will get an hour's time. So you need to kind of pinpoint and specifically talk in terms of numbers, because numbers make more sense, right? You cannot give them subjective excerpts or paraphrased, quotes from whatever documents that you find. So basically, the type of data will inform the type of analysis that you need to apply or you need to research into, and then transform that into a quantitative perspective. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to be 100% quantitative. There can be a hybrid fashion to it, right? Applied to it, but you need to find, like, how can I transform all of this chit chat that is going on in this domain into more quantitative outlook, such that I can just show graphs and charts and tell the audiences about what the talk is about. So even if there is a lot of discussion that is going on, and typically you find this kind of information, and by the way, that is another avenue that you can use, is you can also scour social media to find information, because there are a lot of tech forums that are available on platforms such as, let's say, Reddit, right? Reddit is a very vast source of information that is available, and there's a lot of discussion going on. And this can be applicable to all of your project topics, by the way. There possibly would be a Reddit forum related to something that you're doing, right? So generally what happens is that it's not specific to cybersecurity topics, but you can scour social media, you can get that chit-chatter information, and that's more in the lines of doing market research, right? And market research kind of converts into quantitative data at the end of the day, depending on finding the right methods that you need to apply. Make sense?
Yeah.
Right? And then you can give quotes and say that, oh, if you found that, okay, this quote is very substantial and needs to be presented in the form of a quote, then you can give that. But think in terms of infographics, right? What happens when you try to kind of inform your audiences in a short period of time, right? What is happening in a particular issue, right? So generally, it's a simple example. That is not what you will be, working towards, but think of infographics, right? That's kind of what you're targeting, right? A combination of quantitative and qualitative analysis outcome. That's your goal, right? So now it depends on what data you work with. That is up to your topic, right? I cannot specifically say that this is what you need. Okay. What else?
Oh, okay. So our other question was regarding the implementation.
Mhm.
What type of implementation you're looking for?
The analysis implementation.
Uh,
That's it. Right. So method, I cannot tell you. Method depends on what data you find.
Yeah.
That will govern the method itself, right? So, but one thing that I want to point out is, and this is required, is that you are not doing a traditional survey research topic. Please keep this in mind, and this is very important. This kind of came up from the discussions that you probably had over the last week. This is not a traditional survey research. Okay, emphasis on the traditional part. What that means is that if you just read a bunch of research papers and then you paraphrase their work and you give a report on that, you will lose a hefty amount of points. That is not what we are expecting of you, right? We want you to dig deeper. We want you to apply some analysis methods onto the data that you have collected. Now that could be entirely on research papers. That is up to you. But I'm pretty sure you will find more data outside of academia. It cannot be just restricted to academia, no matter what. And especially some of the topics that some of the groups have selected, which are a little bit more next gen, so to speak. You wouldn't get much information there in academia either, right? So you have to scour and find as much as you can, right? And there is no restriction to the avenue. Go to social media, go to Reddit, go to Twitter. I don't know if FB has any technical discussions, but sure, check it out, right? But I'm not really sure about that. Go to 4chan, find out what is going on, right? What kind of discussion is happening in your domain and try to understand what is happening, right? So if any group ends up doing just a traditional survey and sends that report, we will evaluate it appropriately, right? Based on whatever the grading rubrics are, you will be evaluated accordingly, right? So please keep this in mind that you are not doing a traditional survey research. That is, you're not just reading a bunch of academic research papers, paraphrasing that, and then just writing that into a report. That is not what you're doing, okay? The second thing is, there were some questions which was common is what kind of statistical methods to apply. Okay, again, I cannot tell you this. There's a lot that is out there. You have to be basically the person, your group has to be that entity that decides that, right? And that is completely governed by your data and your questions that you're trying to answer. These two things are important for you to be able to answer this particular method. Because if you're doing data science, if you're doing data analysis, you need to have some sort of hypothesis, or you need to have some sort of research question that you are aiming to answer, right? When you have those questions, then depending on the type of data, you go out and search for the different types of methods that you need to apply. Now, you don't have to develop your own methods. That is not the goal of this project, right? This is not a data science class, right? You can use the existing methods in a black box way, even if you use some of the fundamental data science methods or data analysis methods, the fundamental statistical methods. Let's say one of the methods that you used is basically a word count frequency analysis. And you have some question that is associated and you need that method for that. That's fine, as long as you come up with something reasonable or informative out of that analysis. That is what is important, right? So we are not going to evaluate you based on the complexity of the statistical methods that you apply. That is not our intention. We want to know that, okay, you were able to apply some sort of analysis to all this data that you have collected, and you are capable of presenting that in a concise, structured fashion to your audiences, because this is what generally you will be facing in the industry, because they will tell you to make some report on some topic and present it to your upper management or your peers or whatever, right? Or in a conference, right? So you need to be prepared for that kind of activity. Okay, so traditional survey research, statistical methods, what else?
Is there like specific sections you're expecting in the future?
Presentation will be based on how you structure the stuff, right? But what you have to keep in mind is essentially what I have given here at the very end with respect to how you begin, right? So the deliverables kind of identify what is there, but this is what my expectation is with respect to your end goals, right? So some of these 9 questions that are there, these are just preliminary ideas on how to get your thought process started, right? This is where I was thinking like, okay, what do you need to answer when you're working in this particular domain? You need to take this further, because once you start digging into these domains, once you start getting more data, that will inform you better about, okay, I want to look into this particular matter within this particular domain. Domains are very broad. It's a broad stroke of an ink, right? So if you're trying to address the whole thing, that is going to be a substantial amount of task, and it can be challenging depending on how easily you find the data to complete it in the upcoming 6 weeks of time that you have. That is more or less what you have right now. The 4 weeks in March and give or take the 2 weeks in April, accounting for all your other courses, your personal life and stuff like that, you won't get more than that. Right? Even though the deadline is April 26th, which is the last day of the semester, just assume that you won't get that 2 weeks at the end, because you will have your own stuff going, right? You have to prepare for other homeworks, other exams and stuff like that, right? So these are all variables. So give or take, you have 6 weeks. So whatever you come up with, please make sure that it is not too simple, right? It shouldn't be that, oh, I just did 1 word frequency analysis and here is the report. Don't do that. Right? Put some effort, try to come up with your questions, and then try to answer them. Don't go more than 2 or 3 questions, that I would say, right?
Speaking of the deadline, can we move the deadline just for phase 1 for after the week, like, so we can get the weekend like, to work on it?
Okay. What is there, right? These are the only 2 deliverables left at this point of time.
Yeah. Perfectly.
Okay. All right, so I will put this on record. I can extend the deadline for phase 1. However, this should not be treated as a sequential target for phase 2. That means that if I extend this, let's say by 10 more days, it doesn't mean that the phase 2 time is shrinking.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind. So this is just an extension for your phase 1 and phase 1 alone, and it is mutually exclusive from the time that was allocated for phase 2. Okay, the phase 2 time is still original schedule. So please keep this in mind for everybody who will watch this recording later, for all those who are on call right now and present in class. Okay, so we will modify that. Let's just do it right now, because once I go back, there is nothing to do. Okay, any further questions? So we can keep the discussion going while I work on this.
So besides those deliverables, for example, a lecture review, is it expected to be like a section? Like obviously on the whole paper, but
Can you say that louder a little bit?
a literature review section, is that like required, or do you need that?
Yeah, of course, you need to talk about what is happening in the state of the art. Right? It's like, think about it this way. If you are learning about something new, what do you need to be informed so that you have a full grasp on what is happening? Right? So the literature review section, you don't have to write essays about it. If you talk about some of the major works that you have found, let's say 5 or 6 papers that you think is the most relevant in this domain based on your group's decision that, okay, this is the most important. You just give like a 1 column or more, not more than a 1.5 page survey of that in your own words, just wrap it around. You don't need to paraphrase from them. You don't need to quote them. You don't have to do any of that. Right? In your own words, just tell what is going on in this field, right? Because the rest of the report that you're going to be giving is expected as an outcome of your analysis, right? So that's where you put the major effort. So you don't have to spend too much time writing too much about the articles that you have found. You need to just wrap it up as a prose, right? And not an essay that, okay, this is what is happening. So no more than probably 1,000 to 1,500 words, and that's it. Wrap it up, right? But again, some people ask me like, okay, well, I have done it in like 1 paragraph. If it does address it, sure. But if we feel that, okay, we are not getting a glimpse of what is happening in this field, Because when we will evaluate me and the TA, right, we will come from a perspective that we don't know nothing about this. And we actually on some topics, we don't know. Even I don't know much about it, right? So you have to take that effort into preparing your report in such a way that you're dealing with an audience that is not aware of these things. So what do I need to tell them? And again, don't plagiarize. When you're writing related work and stuff like that, don't copy paste the abstract from other academic papers and put it there as your own. Please do not do this, right? If we find this, we will just drop that full assignment with a 0. There will be no further negotiations as to this is wrong, that is wrong. So you each individually are responsible for each other in the group and the work that they are doing. Please keep this in mind. If you come and say that, oh, XYZ did it, and I'm not responsible for this, I didn't know they did it. No, you are the group. Your work is the representation of the group itself. You are responsible for each other. So if somebody in your group does it, you are also responsible, right? So I'm not going to be entertaining any kind of emails later on if this happens. So please make sure what your members are doing and make sure that nobody is doing something that is not ethical, right? I don't want to deal with those kind of issues, right? Just do your work, whatever you can do. Don't be afraid of the fact that you cannot deliver. If you cannot deliver, own up to it. You're all grown-ups right now, right? So you're not first-year students, second-year student that, oh, let me just cut some slack and let's do it. No, if you cannot do it, just own up to it. We will figure it out from there. Do it right. That's the point, right? All right, so let's fix this now. 9th, I'll give you till the 20th, okay? No more than that. All right, happy? But please make use of this time. Don't sit idle again and then start working 3 days before the 20th. The whole point right now is for you to make sure that you make good use of this time. All right, that is more important. Anyways, any other questions? There are some chats going on here. Yes. So the first question is, we are asking and answering our own questions. That is correct. Research is about finding out what you need to ask and then figure out how to answer them. That is correct, right? This is not a regular assignment, as pointed out in the deliverables document. It's not about me telling you to do something and you doing that, okay? And then, yeah, I can repeat the questions before I answer, right? Okay, I would appreciate if you guys speak up so that I can catch the chat in a timely fashion, rather than it is being gone. Okay, any other questions from online people? No, all good? Yeah. Okay, so one thing that I want to give you, so it is always helpful to get some idea. So there is one work, I think I was discussing this with my EN, she's also my student. So we published a paper recently, okay? And this paper, I can put it up on what do you call it, Moodle, right? Not this version because this is copyrighted, but I can give you our source code that we have. So this was basically about trying to find out, the differences between the focus of the government policies with respect to autonomous vehicles and its acceptance and trust and acceptance of the users in kind of fully embracing the new technology that is being proposed. The whole idea is there is a debate from a user's perspective that whether they should trust the decisions that an autonomous vehicle makes, right? And whether they will sit within an autonomous car and allow that car to do all of the stuff and be completely trustworthy of it, right? So the whole idea here is that the domain was acceptance of autonomous vehicle as a technology from a user's perspective, right? So that is the domain, okay? And the questions that we posed is that, what are the user concerns? We wanted to know about that, right? The second question that we wanted to kind of answer is what is the directions with respect to the policy making that governments have when it comes to autonomous vehicles. If you think in terms of government policies, right, there is a policy regulating different aspects of our society. Autonomous vehicles also falls in one of those regulatory aspects, right? You can think of cybersecurity, you can think of environmental protection policies, everything has some kind of government regulations, right? So we wanted to see that after analyzing the user concerns, then analyzing the government policies, whether or not the government policies are actually along the direction of the concerns that the user actually have. And if not, what to do about it. right? So I hope everybody understands like the overall gist of what it was. So think about it this way. So then the domain becomes autonomous vehicle and trust in autonomous vehicles, right? And the analysis that we wanted to perform is first, what are the user concerns? Second, what is the focus of government policies? Third, is there any correlation between the concerns and the policies? Or if there is a difference, then what is that difference, right? Where the focus needs to be, right? So those were our three analysis questions, right? And the way we wanted to do it is basically collect all the data that we can, the same goal that you guys have for your own individual projects, right? So for each of these independent questions that we had, we kind of collected all the data. So for user concern and analysis, what we did is we basically collected all of the information that we could find on social media chat, right? So we, what do you call that word? I forgot. Scraped Twitter and we scraped Reddit with respect to any kind of autonomous vehicle thread, any kind of user discussions related to autonomous vehicles, whatever is happening, a comprehensive collection, right? So that gives us our first data set. Is basically we use some sort of packages. So basically, if you want to go with Reddit, there is a package called Pro. Okay, so I'll just tell you right now, Reddit would be a very interesting way to go about it. So this is there. So you can check this out. This is used to basically scrape Reddit. Okay. For Twitter, I think what we used in that particular project was called TwinPyth, Python based. Okay. So these are the two available options. We have not worked with FB or any other platforms, but you can check it out. Generally, if you're doing web scraping as well, you can use any web scraping Python packages that are readily available out there, right? You just have to plug it in and follow the instructions there for the documentation. It's not that difficult. So the first process of any data collection will go through scraping. Right, that's your go-to process. You just need to scrape, right? So that is an interesting way because you need to kind of be intuitive enough to figure out that, okay, how I'm going to set up my package in order to extract all these different kind of data. So once we did that, the second avenue or the second data collection aspect was with respect to the public policies for the different governments, right? So what we did is that we did a Google search, basic Google search, and we looked for policy papers, white papers that were available from different governments across the world. So we looked for the US papers, right, in the form of looking into the policy papers for Department of Transportation, then the National Highway Transportation Service Agency, and those kind of papers, those were readily available. Then we looked into individual countries. We went to, countries like China, Russia, that did not pan out. We will not talk about that, why it did not pan out, but we went and looked into other EU countries, right? We looked into Denmark, we looked into Germany, because those were automobile companies. So we know that, okay, we can look that up and they do research in AV technologies and stuff like that. Mercedes, BMW, they're all based off of that region, right? So we knew that. We looked into New Zealand, Australia, you get the idea, right? And so we collected all of that information, right? And then what we did is we kind of created our own structure on how we are going to analyze those PDF documents, because essentially those were all linguistic documents. So we need to come up with our own method, which will supplement the existing NLP methods, natural language processing methods, in order to extract the information in a more structured fashion than just text, right? So this was basically mostly text leaning, right? We didn't get much numbers, but we tried to extract as many numbers as we could from those documents itself. We also did, since we know that we are doing like an analysis of user concern, and policy papers, we also had to see that, okay, this is a peer-reviewed research publication, so we need to see that we're not doing the same thing somebody else has done already, right? You don't have to worry about that part. That is okay, okay? But don't copy from others, right? So then we did a literature review for academia, right? And we looked at, you can see all the numbers that you see here. This is basically some of the works that have done something that is closely in relation to what we were trying to do at that point of time, right? So we research them, and in the literature review, we talk about those papers and what are the shortcomings of those papers and what are we doing differently from those papers. You don't have to worry about this part specifically because, well, if you later on do a good job and you want to get a publication out of it, then we can talk about this aspect of it, right? But for now, just for the sake of the class deliverables, you don't have to worry about how your method differs from anything existing or not, right? So for now, be flexible, feel free to work within the bounds of what question do you want to answer, be creative about it and try to formulate a question. right? Maybe you can get your question ideas from existing research papers as well, but if you do get that idea, you have to then change it. Change it in the sense that you have to do more than what has been done. So maybe you come across a research paper that you think that, oh, they did an analysis as well. I find this interesting. So what you should ask yourself at that point of time is, okay, what have they not done that I can do and make it better? That is the question that you need to ask yourself. Once you ask yourself, the answer to that is basically the research question that you will answer, and life will become easier, right? So that is one of the ways where you can start in terms of formulating the question that you want to work with. Make sense? Okay. So once we did that, we cleaned the data was collected. Pre-processing step will happen for any analysis project, right? So you have to clean the data. So we give some information about, what kind of packages we use, what kind of pre-processing techniques we use. We had to come up with our own categorical terms in order to let the pre-processing work and stuff like that. So those were something that we contributed to the project. We used some of the NLP libraries that was existing. We didn't come up with our own stuff. So it was on a fundamental level. It was nothing too crazy that was going on, because our focus was the outcome of it, and then to analyze that outcome and discuss what is going on, because that is what we wanted to answer, is that whether the government policies are aligned with the concerns that the user has, with the ultimate goal of making users more comfortable to embrace AV as a technology, or any autonomous vehicle as a technology, right? So then we presented all the analysis results. We started off with simple stuff and then moved on to more, complex models, the statistical analysis, and we presented all of this different information, right? So what I can do is, and we talk about these different models that we have used. We have not tweaked them. Again, that's the whole thing for you as well. When I was saying you can use these models once you understand this is what you need as a black box operation, and then just apply it and see what is happening. Then you might need to tweak depending on the type of data that you're working, right? So after that, we just presented some discussion, and that's it. You don't have to do future directions and stuff like that. So you can use this as a reference to understand what is happening, because the structure is kind of a little bit similar, I realized, to the way I have developed the project guidelines and stuff like that. So you can look at this paper. I can share that up. Actually, if you search, since all of you are a student, you have access through Oakland University library to access this paper, right? So if you go to library.oakland.edu, and if you look at the Scholar database, so let me just, do you guys know how to download papers from Oakland University, right? So at least for those who don't know it, I'll just give you a quick walkthrough. Library not near me, oakland.edu. Right, so if you go here, you can go to this databases, right? It will require you to kind of log in using your SSO. Okay, and once you go to the database, here you have many different databases. So for example, let's say you're trying to find some paper which has been published and sponsored by IEEE Explore, right? So all you need to do is basically go to IEEE Explore, search for the name of the paper, and then just download it, right? So this paper has been published using the Springer library. Okay, so you can just search for it and see if Oakland has access to it, and kind of download the one which is for Oakland, right? So generally, when you download it from Oakland, it gives you a watermark somewhere which says that this has been downloaded from Oakland. So you can just download it from there. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because since now I know nobody has selected that topic, there is a paper from me as well, which is on, where is it? Not emerging technologies, but this topic. So I'm pretty sure nobody has selected this, and I know nobody has selected this because I was waiting to see who will select this, but nobody did. So there's a paper from me, but this is a little bit old, right? It is outdated right now because they have changed the stuff like that in 2019. So you can search for like a CSA analysis, a CCM CSA analysis, and you can look for it using my name, right? And that should pop up in Google Scholar as well. It's published in the conference, which has the acronym ICDCN 2018, and it is available in the ACM digital library. So that is where you are looking for, and you all know my name, so I don't have to tell you that. So author name, it will be there, right? It's there with me and my advisor. So that is basically an analysis of how different cloud service providers essentially give information about the different security or governance aspects of their platform, okay, how they contribute that information. So that is basically an analysis of that domain to present a collective information or a collective outcome of what is happening in that particular domain. So you can check this out. And I'm kind of surprised because nobody selected this topic, because I just gave you the entire data set here. So anyways, nobody checked it, it seems. So if anybody has selected this topic, I would have had to kind of, abstract the information that there is a paper already on it, but the data was almost, set up on a plate and given to you, right? I even gave a Google Drive link for you to go and check it out, what is happening. Nobody did. So anyways, I don't know if I should say I was happy about it or not, but I am proud that you guys went for more challenging topics. This one is actually a little bit challenging as well, because the emphasis is a lot on figuring out the statistical methods and stuff like that. But anyways, that's water under the bridge right now. So, but again, if you need a reference, these are the two papers that are available that gives or presents to you some structure of how you need to kind of approach your research and stuff like that. So use that as a reference, work on that, right? But again, please remember, the deadline has been extended. That is mutually exclusive from the time that is allocated for phase 2. So please put the effort. Again, I'm repeating, if you do not put effort into this project topic, you are not going to perform well, right? And we are not looking for you to give us a paraphrased report of academic papers. We want you to analyze the data that you collect, even if it is linguistic. Okay, so I hope that clarifies, and meet with the TA. She's there to help. She's there to give you feedback. She's there to, answer your questions and clarify. And if she cannot, I will be there, right? So we are working together. This is not something that you want to be working individually. You want to get feedback, iterate feedback, and try to stay on track, right? If you work now, your life will be much easier when April 10, 12 comes. Basically, that is the time when the no exam weeks comes, and you are preparing for all your other stuff and stuff like that, right? So if you want to chill, then you need to put some effort now, some more systematic effort, so that you can focus on whatever you want to focus on at that point of time. You don't want to stretch this to 26th. That's my guideline. You want to be over with it in a reasonable fashion. That's the point, right? So it's not hard. Once you get the ball rolling, you will start liking it. But you have to break that ice with your topic. That's the point, right? Initially, when you're trying to just, theory craft and brainstorm what I want to do, it seems a little bit difficult. But once you get a hang of what you want to do, right, things start to become a little bit interesting, because then your mind is full of ideas and how you want to see and stuff. And once you get to the analysis part, then it's more about implementation rather than thought process. So it's a combination of things that you might like. Some of them you might be frustrated, but if you keep at it, you can overcome that. Right? I'm pretty sure, and I believe in all of it. Okay, any other questions?
So the part with pre-processing the data, can you elaborate on that? Because when I think of it, I just think of the pre-processing in machine learning, but I don't think that's the topic expensive. Okay,
so the question was to elaborate on pre-processing.
Yeah.
Right. So pre-processing basically is with respect to your cleaning of data, right? So in that sense, data science has some, or the topic of data science has some specific set of steps that you need to take in order to perform pre-processing. So that requires you to remove, say, things like articles, A and B. You need to stem the words. You need to apply different methods called lemmatization, such that you are kind of transforming different words into its base form, right? Because you can have some words such as active, actively, these are the best example that I can come with, but many words have different variations, right? So you have organized, organization, okay, organized. These are all referring to the same core ideology, right? So if you're working with linguistic data as such, then you need to clean those data in order to make your life easier when you're going to perform your actual analysis, right? Similarly, if you're, let's say, collecting different CSV files, right? The reporting, for example, let's say, if it is a crowdsourced based submission of data based on a certain template, right? So let's say I give all of you a survey, and that survey doesn't have a yes and no question. It has some sort of binary, it has some sort of like continuous classification or some kind of linguistic feedback. So not everybody, so let's say, do you work full-time? And I don't give you a structure on how you want to answer that. Some people might say yes, spelled out. Some people might say why, just for the yes part. Some people might give a 1 or 0 encoding to represent yes or no. Things like this happen. It might sound a little bit, oh, who does that? But it does happen, right? So if you're working with, let's say, quant data in that aspect, right, you need to give some uniform standardization with respect to how those encodings are happening and stuff like that. So that is what the different steps of pre-processing involves. So if you're working purely with linguistic data, just as a starting point, look for the basic steps of data pre-processing within data science, right? And then there are packages that will just apply them one after the other. So you don't have to worry about that. Okay. Any other questions? Online? Is everything good? Okay, we'll take that as a yes. Yeah. All right, so that takes care of more or less what I had in mind and whatever questions that you had. For the remaining time, we will just move forward with our lecture. We are a little bit behind, probably like a week or so. Okay, so we'll try to catch up and talk about some of the stuffs moving forward with respect to our AWS platform. Okay, so the main things that I want to talk about, there are 3 important things. More than working with AWS itself, we need to talk about the structure of AWS, setting up of AWS right now before we move into infrastructure as a service, that is learning about EC2 platform. So I don't know how much we can cover today itself, but essentially what I want to talk about is AWS service that is known as identity and access management, which is one of the first stepping stones when you start working with AWS for any organization, is you need to work with IAM, right? Or IAM, some people call it IAM, I call it IAM, whatever you want to call it, right? Or you can spell it out, right? So we need to understand things such as roles, okay? We need to understand things such as user groups, okay? And how you can create roles, how you can create different user groups, and then assign these roles to different user groups, right? So this is basically how you are doing authorization, right? How you are controlling who can do what within the system or within the ecosystem that you create on AWS platform. So this, as far as security is concerned, is one of the quintessential steps that you need to be aware of when you are setting up your platform or your ecosystem using AWS, right? Because if any cybersecurity compromise happens within your setup and it is tied back to identity and access management, that is, you were not aware of this and you didn't do it properly, then AWS is not responsible for the loss of data or the loss of reputation that is going to happen for your organization. You yourself are responsible. So remember, we talked about the shared security model or the shared model for responsibility before when we were discussing about cloud architecture. And this is the reason why we need to understand. So typically, from a conceptual standpoint, okay, on a very broader scale, most of the companies, the way they kind of implement their IAM policies is by using this method that is known as RBAC. Okay, this is a well-known short form. The full form stands for Role-Based Access Control. Okay. So on a very broad level, if you're trying to control the access control for your entire organization, and this is not specific to cloud, right? It's just that the service or the method of RBAC is implemented through the IAM service on AWS, right? But the conceptual foundation on how this access control works is based on role-based access control, okay? In addition to RBAC, there are more finer, granular ways to control access, okay, of different users and organizations, right? So sometimes you may see supplementary methods, and that is the important term or the emphasis, is that these are not alternatives to what RBAC does. You can strengthen RBAC by using some of these alternative methods. So you have what is known as ACL, or Access Control List. So basically you create a list of who can do what, who can access what, and stuff like that. And then you have what is known as attribute-based access control, or ABAC or ABAC, which is a more fine-tuned form of role-based access control, right? So we want to talk about those different policies first. The second thing, and I'm pretty sure we won't have time for this, is we need to talk about how networking works within AWS, right? So when you set up AWS, your platform, your ecosystem, basically, right? You need to understand how the networking is set up. And with respect to the networking, you need to also have a knowledge of what are the different ways in which firewall is established when it comes to networking, and what are the different services, or what are the different ways in which AWS does this firewall services, right? So here, when we talk about firewalls, the two things that is specific to AWS is to understand what is the concept of security groups and network ACLs. So we talked about the fact that ACL stands for access control list. So when we think in terms of network ACL, then we are thinking in terms of a list that kind of outlines what type of network protocols is going to be allowed into the AWS ecosystem, and what kind of networking request response cycle will be sent outside of the AWS network, right? So in short, this is also known as an ACL. Okay, so you can either call it network ACL or you can call it an ACL, and then security groups, the short form is SG itself. Okay, so we need to understand this and how this conceptually relates back to how it has been built. Is like when it comes to firewall, there are two different categories of firewall that you need to be familiar with, right? The first set is known as a stateful firewall. Okay, and the second one is known as a stateless firewall. Okay, so here, basically, when we talk about these two specific ways in which firewall policies are implemented on AWS, they kind of trace back to one of these two categories, right? So we are going to learn about specifically what these two categories of firewall policies are, and then how it relates to these individual policies and how to set them up, okay? We won't be dealing too deep into security groups and network ACL, because when we work with EC2 or Elastic Compute Cloud or infrastructure as a service, that's when we are going to need these security groups, because specifically, security groups don't work without the presence of any EC2 nodes, right? So we need that to be present in order to kind of write the policies around that. Because think about it this way, if there is no computer, how are you going to define the firewall policies, right? So that seems a little bit concrete to you. And when it comes to specifically about networking, all of you know about the fact that you need a router to kind of bridge the gap between two different network subnets. Right. So if you have a cluster of network in one location and you have a cluster of network in another location, you basically need a router to kind of bridge that gap between those two networks. Right. So you understand that, but what you have to understand is how do you associate IP addresses to all of these different, let's say, EC2 instances that you're going to create within your deployment on AWS. Right. So AWS does not use the typical traditional IP structure that we are familiar with. They use what is known as a classless interdomain routing protocol, okay? Or it's known as CIDR, or sometimes in short, it's called CIDR. So it uses this IP addresses that has been structured by these CIDR blocks. So what we have to understand specifically is not how basic networking works, but how these CIDR blocks are determined, right? So if you see an IP address, right? So if I open this IP address and I see something like, 10.0.1.12 or something like this, what class of IP address is this? Class A, right? These are fundamental knowledge. So this is not what we need to understand. But when you look at the IP addresses on AWS itself, you're not going to see an individual IP address. You're going to see a block of IP address that can be chopped off and then assigned to each individual EC2 instances that you're going to initiate on AWS. So how do you decide which subnet gets how much of that block? How do you set that up, right? How do you regulate that? That is something that you need to have a conceptual understanding of. That is not something I don't know if they teach it in computer networks right now, but this is what we need to know. So when you look at it, you know what that means. Right? So in the CIDR block, what will happen is that you will get something like this, 10.0.10/24. This is what AWS is going to show you. You need to know how this translates into this. And this structure of how these IP addresses are being presented, this is a block of IP address. They're giving you IP addresses that you can use and assign it to the different EC2 instances that you might create, right? So here, this is what the CIDR notation is. You need to know how this can be converted to this. How many IP addresses is present within this? For those who know, good. For those who don't know, this is what we want to learn, right? Is that how do you look at this and translate into what are the range of IP addresses that is available for you and that you can use and assign it to the different EC2 instances that you're going to create, right? So those are the three things that we want to work on. And after that, we can just jump into EC2 once we have an understanding of these basic concepts, because EC2 kind of revolves around that. So we need to have a clear understanding of this first before we move on, right? So the first thing that we want to do is log into our EC2 account. All right, so we have not still created, or at least we have not still learned how to create the IAM user, but this is the first step that we want to do, is we want to create a user that is not an owner. Remember here, we always remember that the root, we think in terms of Linux or something like that, is the admin, right? But here, the root is the owner, right? So we need to create an admin user itself, which they refer to as the IAM user, right? So the first step after the owner has created the account, and remember the owner is the only one, or the owner's account is the only one who can access all the money stuff, the billing stuff, right? So once we move into the other account, which is the IAM user, we will no longer be able to access the billing, okay? The other thing that I keep forgetting, please mark your calendars probably by today or tonight, if there's no day, by tonight, is this billing alarm that we created. You need to destroy that once the semester is over, because that is going to cost you money once your 12-month is over, okay? So mark your calendars whenever the end of the semester is. This is the only thing that we will not be able to destroy until the semester is over, because we need to keep a track of the billing, right? Every other service that we are going to test and demo, we will destroy it right after we are done. But this is the service that we need to destroy once this course is over. So you have to go to CloudWatch service. So let me just write down the roadmap for you to kind of keep a note. You have to go to the AWS console. You have to go to the service called CloudWatch, and then you have to delete the custom billing alarm. Okay, you have to do it from CloudWatch, and then you have to also do it from the service of simple notification service. So please make sure that individually, once this semester is over, you go to AWS console and you log in as the root user. Okay, and your region needs to be global. Global region, or you can call it as Virginia. Okay, because that is the HQ, right? So basically you need to log in as the root user, not as an IAM user, okay? Then you need to search for CloudWatch, delete the monitoring service, and then you need to go to SNS, the simple notification service, and delete it. Remember, this is the only thing that we will not be deleting right now. So I might forget later on to tell you, so mark your own calendars to do so, okay? After 12 months, you will be charged, all right? So moving on, let's log back in. So I'm going to log in using my account information. And one of you, please just notify me when it's 7:15, because I'm scared. All right, let me find my stuff. You guys can go ahead and log in. It's always a pain for me to remember all of these things. Okay. Okay, So it's just showing me stuff. I'm still in North Virginia, which is fine. That's where I want to be. All right. So anytime you want to go back to the dashboard, you can just click on this AWS symbol there. And that will take you to all of the different things that is showing there. I just don't want to see this. I can just probably just delete this information. Remove widget. Okay. If you guys want to keep it, you can keep it. And all the steps are kind of listed here, right? So anytime you forget what you want to do, please go back, visit the what do you call it, the slides, and then all of the information that is there will be available again. All right. So let's talk about the concept first, and then we want to move forward with how we want to do it, right? So the first service that we want to touch upon right now is, or the exercise that we want to do is the creation of an IAM admin user. Okay, that is what we want to create, right? So search for the service that is IAM itself, okay? Or you can search for it within the category and stuff like that. So this is what we want to look for, okay? We don't want to go to the IAM Identity Center. We just want to go to the main service, the parent service, that is IAM, right? So once you go to IAM, give it some time, all right? You can see here that we don't have multi-factor authentication. We have not implemented that. So if you're doing it on a production environment, please make sure MFA is turned on, right? Create that. There is no service access keys, right? So I think everybody's familiar. If you have done any kind of programming that requires API access, that is what access keys are talking about, right? So if you have worked with, let's say, Google Maps or Google Places or any of those sorts of things, right? You have to create the secret key that you kind of embed within your program so that your program can access those services that is being provided to it, right? So this is what the access key is. We have not created any as such, right? There's also access permissions with respect to who can access the billing and the cost management and the account consoles and stuff like that. So we have not created any policies. And here you can see the different types of categories of information that IAM basically manages, right? So note the fact that there are user groups and then there are individual users, okay? In addition to that, there is roles as well. Roles can be assumed by individual users or AWS services. That is an important thing that you have to remember, that roles are not specific to just people, but roles are also something that you need to, or you can associate to the AWS services itself. Because when we go further and we talk about databases and we talk about our storage buckets like S3 and stuff like that, let's say you write an EC2 instance, right? Or you create an EC2 instance and then you associate that to a database. So that means that EC2 instance needs read and write access to that database. And these are all two different types of service, right? So there has to be some sort of policies that allows that EC2 instance to be able to read data from your database or read data from, let's say, your S3 bucket, which is your object storage unit and stuff like that, right? So that is also policies. So those are roles, and roles govern what policies are there. That is, what kind of permissions are you going to associate? Then you take each of these roles and then you either assign that to AWS services or you assign that to user groups. And then you create users and assign them to groups. So understand this logic here, and this is what this particular chart is kind of telling us here, is that you need to define two things first. First is, what are your different roles, if you want to define that, right? So the roles can be in the form of, let's say, somebody is going to be admin, and it could be associated to a user group, which will be admin, right? So you are going to associate that role to the admin group and not to the individual users. And then if you create a new user account, let's say as an admin, right? Then you can assign that to a group that you have created. And that group will automatically be attached to a role that you have already defined, the policy. So the process that you have to keep in mind when it comes to RBAC and all of these different role-based access control that you're doing is that as, let's say, a root user, you don't create a user account and then you don't associate their access control policies. You don't do that, right? Because what happens, let's say you have 2 database developers, okay? And then you have 3 front-end developers, right? That is what you're doing. Based on that, you are going to govern what resources they can access and stuff like that. So what happens in this process is that if you're individually going to create the user and then define their policies, there is a chance that you can make a human error. right? You can forget attaching a particular policies and stuff like that, and that might cause a mistake that might lead to a compromise with somebody having access to a resource that they should not have. So what, as a root user, you should do is you should create, instead of individual users and then attaching access control policies to them, you need to create user groups. So that way, what I can say is that, okay, I have created a user group for all my admins. I have created a group for, let's say, all of my front-end developers. And then I have created a group for all of my database developers. Not developers, but the managers and stuff like that, right? And then what I do is that as a one-time process, I create all of the policies and then attach that to each of these groups. So that is going to be my first step when it comes to IAM. Okay. In the second step, so this is the first step. In the second step is whenever a new user comes, okay, all I have to do is, let's say if you have from user 1 to up till user K, okay, all you do is you assign them to their respective groups. And since you already know and you have the peace of mind that there is a policy that is associated to every group, you don't have to worry about whether or not you have made sure that every individual user has the right access control policies, right? So this is basically the structure that you need to follow whenever you're setting up or working with IAM. First, create groups, associate roles and policies to that group, then create a user, and then associate that user to a particular group, right? So that way you are avoiding that avenue where you might make a human error trying to connect every individual users to different policies, right? So that is something that you have to keep in mind. So again, as we talked about, developers, security admins, then assign individual users to those groups, and each of these groups have different types of permissions that is associated with them. Okay. So once you do that, there are two ways in which you can authenticate. The first one, as we talked about, there is no access key. So if you want programmatic access to all of these different AWS services, you need to generate the access key. Okay. And then in your program, you will take that whole string and you will put it somewhere safe, hopefully in a .env file. Okay. And not publicly out there. All right. The second way, since we are using the dashboard or the console, AWS console through the browser access, is the one that we will be following through right now, is basically to create a custom username and password for the IAM users that we will be creating, right? So that means as a root user, I will create an admin group in this exercise. I will create a user, not Mary, but me, okay? And then I will basically create a custom username and password for that IAM user, and then furnish that information to them. So the next time when they log in, they can essentially use their credentials and not the root credentials. That is basically what the whole idea is, right? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to kind of edit the link your users will use to access your organization's ecosystem on AWS. So right now, if you look at the AWS console here, right? If you notice this is what your account alias is all about. You see, there is this weird number. So whenever you are going to give a sign-on link to your users, right, they're going to see that number at the rate of AWS management console, ... blah, 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 right? That is not a human way to kind of give a sign-on link to somebody. You want to create something which is a little bit more workable, right? So you click on this create button here, right? So you can see here, that is basically the sign-in URL. This is the URL that will be given right now if I don't edit this, right? This is hard to remember, right? So if you hit create, this will allow you to give a alias that will replace that number, right? So here I can give some value. I'll just probably use the same thing from last time. Okay. I'll just do this, maybe W23. Oh, I cannot use all of these stuff. Okay. Hopefully they like this, and I need to remember this. So let me just do what you guys are also doing. Take a picture. Right? And save the changes. Okay. probably doesn't like this, so I'm just going to remove this. It doesn't like the numbers and stuff like that. So I will save the changes and I have to take a picture again to remember this. Okay. So anyways, so you can give whatever names you want. So that makes it more human that you're going to provide. So this is the URL that you're going to provide to your users, right? And they're going to use that. So when you provide this URL, they're not going to see the IAM access, the root user access anymore. They will just be asked to kind of enter. There will be a 12-digit access key that will be there that they have to specify in order to kind of say which ecosystem they're trying to log in as an IAM user, right? So instead of kind of specifying that entire ecosystem name, they can just provide the alias that we have created right now. Okay. And you can always edit this. You can always delete this. You can come back to this. So this is not a one-time, right? So I'm going to copy this for the time being. And then I'm going to open my notepad. And I'm just going to keep it here for the time. Okay. So this is the first step. So this is done. The next thing that we want to pay attention to is basically this left-hand menu here. So you can see the process that we talked about is that, oh, we want to create user groups. Then we want to create a policy that is for administrators. You can do the same thing for developers and stuff like that, but you will get the idea. And then that is done through the user groups. And then the second step is to create a user and then assign them to a group. So what we are going to do, the two-step process, is first create an administrators group, associate an admin access policy to that group. That's the first step. Second step, go to this user's account, okay, create a new user, give them a user ID and a password, and then associate them to an existing group. Okay, so that's the two-step process that we're going to follow. So if you ever have a confusion, always come back to this slide, and then you can kind of see the step-by-step process of what is happening. Okay, the snapshots may be a little bit different depending on whether AWS have kind of cleaned or refreshed their whole interface or not, but it will give you the gist of what is there. So if you don't find that information as to what you're seeing in the snapshot, look around a little bit, look for the actual content, and you will find it somewhere, right? So the first step, that is what we're going to follow here. We're going to select create group from the left vertical menu as identified here. So I'm going to go into user groups here, and you can see right now, I cannot see because of this weird stuff, right? Okay, so now nothing is there. So we need to first create a group. Okay, so go create a group. Now you can write whatever names that you want to put here. So I'm going to say okay, admin group. Whatever you want to put, you can put it. All right. So now you can see here that you can add users right now at this point of time when you're creating the group, right? So if you already have users that you have created, that is, if you did step 2 first and then you're doing step 1, then you have an option. It will show you the different users that you want to add here. But we are going to follow the systematic approach. That is, first create the group, associate the role to that group, then create the user, right? Not the other way around. You do not want to create a user who doesn't have any kind of protection around them, or you are not putting any kind of protection around them, right? So going next, if you see the next subsection of this particular template, it talks about permission and policies. So this is the important part here, because this controls what users in this group can or cannot do. AWS gives you the option of many predefined policies that they have already created. So you know that it is secure to a certain degree. Well, not a certain degree, it is secure, right? You can define your own policies as well by clicking on create policies here. But since we are going to work with the most basic policy that we want to work with, we will search for it and we will do administrator. And let's look for it. Okay. So you can see here that there is a lot of administrator that is floating around. What we want is basically this one, administrator access. Okay. And by the way, another note, all policy documents are JSON. So if you're not familiar with JSON, you need to learn about JSON. Okay. So here, if we go right here, you can see what this policy is all about. So if you're not familiar with JSON, you have to learn JSON. Otherwise, you cannot write your own policy. And if you're somebody who is working as a cloud architect, you need to know JSON if you want to work with this.
That's the language used to write.
Yes. That's the representation. Yes, that is correct, right? So it's a key value pair, but it is in JavaScript object notation, right? So all of them basically are on both sides are string. Okay, if you have a simple object notation, not the JSON notation, the key will basically be written as such. There is no quotations around them, right? But once you move it to a JSON format, both sides are string. Unless you have a number, then it becomes a number, right? So here you can see that this was created in 2012. That goes back to when AWS just moved away from the Amazon domain, started their own AWS domain for AWS stuff and stuff like that. So it kind of predates back a little bit, right? And then within this statement key is where you have all of the different things. So what is the effect? It is to allow the user. What action will be allowed? Star represents everything. So one generic thing, please keep in mind, and this is applicable to when defining security policies as well for your network. If you see a star, that means everything. That's basically the notation, right? And then what resources are you allowing the administrator to access? Well, everything. So that means within your ecosystem, whatever services that you create, define, EC2, whatever it might be, the administrator can do all of it, right? So what you want to do is basically you want to select this, and you can go through all of these individual policies. The best way to learn is to kind of review what is there and then create your own. Remember, in programming and in other domains as well, you don't start from scratch. Okay, you get some idea what is happening and then you make it your own. Okay, so you select this. So make sure you check mark this, and then you just hit create group. Okay, so now you see the admin group. Right now, we don't have any users. So this will either keep on loading and then it will say could not find and stuff like that. But that is the first step that we have done. And we are over with that particular step. Okay. So once that is done, then the second step of this exercise that we talked about is we need to create now a user, give them a user ID and a password, and associate them to a group. Because remember, once a group is created, you are free from the headache of figuring out whether you are giving permissions to your individual users, because you know for a fact that every group has a permission policy that is associated with them. So you don't have to worry about whether you are specifying access control policies for your individual users. So that is why this process is important for you to remember, is always when you're working with RBAC, which is role-based access control, first create your roles, create the groups and the permission policies for that roles, then assign individual users to every group, not the other way around. Never create a user first and then a group, because for that period of time, the user is unchecked. You don't want them. Okay, so always keep that in mind. First, groups with permission policies, and then associate individual users to it. Okay, so again, following this instruction that is there, what we are going to do is we are going to look back into this left vertical menu again. We have already worked with our group. Next thing that we want to do is basically go into users. So again, no, we don't want this experience. What we want to do is basically go to this top right corner button here, which says add users for first time operations, right? So this will ask you to enter a username. So let's say I create a user here, not Mary, but me. Something that I won't misspell. Okay. All right. So you can give this access management console here if you're providing the stuff like that. So go next. Okay. And then here you can see that it will tell you that do you want to copy existing permissions? Do you want to attach the policies directly? Again, don't do that. That's an additional headache that you have to keep track of, right? If you're supplementing the information, that's fine, but still not suggested. If you find that, okay, I need to give more policies and permissions to this user, create a new group, even if it is for one user. Because you know in your head, in terms of management of your permission policies, it is always associated to a group. So you don't want to go into that individual level and see what every user does and doesn't do. Don't do that, right? You can do it, you can see here, but not suggested. So always you want to add a user to a group and manage your permissions through the group. That's more safer in terms of you keeping a track of how things are working, right? So I'm going to select add user to a group, and I'm going to select the admin group. Okay. You can kind of go down here and you can control what is the maximum number of permissions that you want to give and stuff like that. I come here, I don't see this. I go there, I don't see that. All right. So go to previous, and then I'll just give provide access. Okay. And then create an auto IAM user, and then you want to give a custom password, right? Because you don't want this a programmatic access, right? You want the IAM user to be able to access the interface through the browser from anywhere, right? But not as a root user, but as an admin IAM user, right? So once you click on that providing master, and this has been changed from last year. Last year, this used to be there, right? Now you have to select manually, right? That you want to give them access, okay? So when you want to give them access, you want to give them access as an IAM user. That is our exercise's goal. I can let Amazon generate the password, which I will forget and not be able to track anymore. But if you are good with that, then you can use it because they will generate a very strong password for you, or you can give your own custom password, right? So I'm going to give my custom password here. So this will take a moment because I need to write this down. So you guys can go ahead, give your password, go next, okay? And I will just do a simple one. All right. Please don't misspell. What does it need? Must include 3 of the following mix: uppercase letter, lowercase letter. Okay, uppercase letter. It's good. Okay. All right. So, and then there's this checkbox here, which is kind of self-explanatory. Is sometimes what happens is people send you the link to register for a particular platform, and then when you log in, you have to create your own password, right? So if you want to enforce that, you can check mark this. I don't want to do that because I have to track a lot of stuff, right? So I will just uncheck it, go to next. Okay, don't want to save my password. I have already assigned my user to the admin group, so I'm creating an admin users. Okay, go next. All right. Here you will see this section in all of the templates that we will work with, right? Whatever service we work with, we're always going to see this. So this is user defined. This has nothing to do with AWS. For you to be able to search for a particular thing that you are creating within your ecosystem, you need keywords, right? This is what these tags are all about. So these are completely optional if you want to give them, and specifically you need to give them in a production environment for you to be able to track a very large environment, right? So here you can say that user created for, or user admin, something like this. So be creative, keep tags. Tags will help you keep track of things in a more systematic manner, right? So I'm going to skip this, doesn't require it. And then okay, so this is the whole situation right now. It has given us the URL link, and you can see that the alias that we created at the very beginning and not the number is what we will need for the IAM user. The IAM user is basically, this is the username, and then this is my password, and you can check that. If you want to save this somewhere and keep a record for yourself on your local computer, not suggested if it's not secure, you can do so, right? But find somewhere safe to keep it. Don't upload it to Google Drive or GitHub after you have created something like this, right? A lot of people do that. So what I'm going to do, and the easiest way is to do this, right? A lot of time you see when you register for some services, they send you a link, right? How does that happen? Well, this is how it happens, right? They use these services, and this is set up with SNS basically to automate the process. So SNS does the notification part for it, right? So what you need to do is you need to go to SNS, you need to create a new notification service that whenever a new user is created, take their username, password, and email to them, make them change the password later on, because that is an auto-generated password. So you don't want to use them, right? So if you want to do that, you can always do that. Be very careful if you download the CSV file, wherever you're keeping it, make sure it's secure, right? Otherwise, going through all of this hassle only to see that your laptop got compromised and everybody knows everything about your user base. Don't want to do that, right? That's the easiest way to get a pink slip. Okay, so what I want to do now is I have already copied this. Hopefully I remember this and you remember yours as well. So what we want to do is essentially log out now. Our root user business is done. The next time that we log in as a root user is when we want to destroy the custom billing account. That is the only time that you're going to see the root user again, right? So all of this process is done. And now we need to re-log in into our AWS console. So what I'm going to do is basically go here, sign out, and just make sure that, yeah, I know. Okay, so now I can sign out. All right. So the next thing that I want to do is move my Zoom console here. I need to go back to my link here, copy this, come back here, go to the console and paste this. Okay, so now you can see the only difference is that if you did not use this link and if you did a Google search of AWS console, you would have had this field empty. That's the only difference that would have been there because you would have selected an IAM user, right? So let me just show you real quick, right? So let's say if I search for AWS console here, right? It says AWS management console. Okay, log back in. And now it has caught that session ID, so I cannot destroy it anymore. So you can try doing it from a private browser and stuff like that so that it doesn't capture the session ID, okay, or the session basically. You remember what we did when we just logged in earlier is that I selected root user, but right below that there was a field which said IAM user. So when you select IAM user, it will just ask you for that same thing. You will see these three fields again, right? So that is what you have to keep in mind. So in order to skip that process of filling that field, because sometimes people don't create aliases, they have this 12-digit account ID, which we saw previously. If you hadn't created that alias, it's difficult to remember that whole thing. So people just use that link. Okay. So anyways, let's log in. Let me not regret not checking this. Okay, what happened? Dude. Okay. So now if you notice at the top right corner here, now it is no longer saying root user. You remember the root ID was something different. It had some of our course name, blah, 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 and stuff like that. But now you see it's a username at the rate of your cloud owner's name. That is whatever your ecosystem is, right? So here right now, we are in North Virginia. We are going to move to our closest availability region at this point of time. We don't want to work with NV anymore, which is going to be US East, Region 2, Ohio, right? Within that, there are three availability zones in total, okay? So that is what you have to keep in mind. Now, the main thing, once you start off with this process, once you're done with this process, the first place when you're working with infrastructure as a service is to create what is AWS, as AWS calls it, as your own virtual private cloud. That is basically the ecosystem. That is not the individual instances that you're going to run and stuff like that, but that is basically the network that you're going to create, right? And this VPC can span across multiple availability regions. It will obviously span across multiple availability zones, no doubt about it. But this is how you create your ecosystem, by starting with the service of virtual private cloud. So at the search bar, the very top, you want to look for VPC, okay? So this is where you need to first go. And remember, anytime you start working on anything, your eyes should first pay attention to where you are. This is very important, right? So if you want to move something or create a service in a different availability region altogether, please make sure that you're not in a region that you don't want to. So before you do something, just as a habit, shift your eyes to the top right corner, look at who the user is, look at where the availability region is. Just a quick glance, just to make sure everything is working. Yes.
So renaming the users, should we do that in the global region or?
When you log in as a root user, generally it takes you to that global region first. You can change that region as well as a root user, right? But you can do so, okay? But once this is done, from this point onwards, once an admin user is created, let the admin control the rest. You want to get out of that root and, well, for security purposes only, you don't want to do it because that is like an uncompromised access to everything, right? So once this is created, now you can revisit IAM service and create the rest of the groups and stuff like that. You don't have to do it. If you want to, you can do it, but you don't have to. Okay. All right. So VPC is your starting point to infrastructure as a service. That is what you have to keep in mind. So VPC within a particular region will give you an outlook to everything that is present with respect to the ecosystem of your infrastructure as a service that you plan to create. So that means you can see here that it will show you what all the different gateways that are present. what are the different subnets that are deployed. Remember, by default, you're going to get a VPC. You can create your own as well. So this VPC, anytime you switch to a particular region, so I switched to Ohio, right? So there is a VPC here in Ohio, and you can see that there is availability of 3 subnets. 3 subnets, meaning by default, it has created one public subnet per availability zone that is present in a region. That is what you need to remember, right? So that means if I move on to, let's say, North Virginia, okay, if I, let's say, switch back to North Virginia again, give it some time. Okay, and still within the VPC management console. But now if you notice here within the subnets, this has changed to 6, which is indicative of the fact that the availability region of North Virginia has 6 availability zones. For each zone, there has been a public subnet that has been created for you to work, right? So now you can deploy all of these EC2 instances within these public subnets. This is the multi-AZ deployment that we're talking about, not fully, right? We can make it more concrete, right? But by default, you get this structure. You can always create your own VPC. You can create your own subnets within these regions as well. There is no problem with that, right? But what is important and what we want to get out of this particular discussion here is that when you create this IaaS infrastructure on AWS, VPC is your starting point, because that gives you the complete picture of your ecosystem. What is there? What are the different components? So as I was talking about, it shows you all the gateway routers, right? Well, gateway is a type of router. It talks to you about the different types of default subnets that are present. Subnet, you can think in terms of clusters of networks that is present in your entire ecosystem, right? Then it shows you about the internet gateways. So basically the router that helps your subnets connect to the public internet infrastructure. So you are going to get always one gateway. Gateway is going to be present on the VPC's edge, right? And everything within that is basically the subnets, and we will see that stuff. It will show you the route tables, the IP addresses, and all of those different stuff. It will also show you different ways of what are the outgoing traffic. So there are gateways that are specific to only outgoing traffic coming from your subnet going out to the public, okay? Then there are internet gateways, which is basically a bi-directional traffic of the router. So it can come, traffic can come from the internet into your VPC, it can go from your VPC to the internet and stuff like that. But basically, security groups, network ACLs, all of this stuff, the overview is VPC. That is your takeaway from this discussion, right? So anything you want to find at a glance, start with the VPC service. It will show you all the instances that are running, all of the IP addresses that you have assigned and stuff like that. So everything that you want to know is present in this one single place, right? So now let us look at what does a VPC actually look like. So on a very high level overview, okay, within a particular region, you get one VPC by default. Again, remember, you can define your own as well if you don't want to work within the default VPC. Okay, there's no problem with that. But the way it works is that when you move on to a particular region, and we saw that we moved from Ohio to Virginia, and we saw the VPC slightly changing. So this gives you a way to kind of define your ecosystems across multiple regions. So that means if you have a particular availability region, you will get one default VPC for virtual private cloud that AWS will create for you. It's always there, okay? Within that VPC, you will have what we call as subnets. Now, these subnets can be of 2 categories. They can either be public or they can be private, okay? And these subnets, by default, if you do not change the configurations of where the subnets are created, is deployed across all of the different availability zones that is essentially present within that.
715, Professor.
Oh, okay.
715.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so when you set that up, you're going to get one public subnet, okay, for every availability region. All right. So essentially, in Ohio, there is 3 availability zones. We know that. So that's why we see 3 subnets. In Virginia, there is 6 availability zones. So we will see 6 and stuff like that, right? So that is the nature. For every VPC, if you notice here, where is my pen? If you notice that every VPC gets its own internet gateway. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the next class, but Gateways are nothing but routers that allows you to connect to the public internet. Okay, and as we talked about the fact that there can be two subnets, the public subnet and then the private subnet. Public subnet is basically tied up through this VPC router to the internet gateway. So that means any infrastructure, so these yellow dots that you see here are basically EC2 instances, right? So any instances that are present or any services that is present within the public subnet can communicate to the outside world. That is the reason why you're calling it public. And the opposite of it, that is, if you have a private subnet, any instances within the private subnet can communicate through the VPC router to only with the other subnets that are present within a VPC. So that is what you have to keep in mind, is that private do not have access to the internet gateway. So the only way that private things can access outside world is that they have to go through the VPC router to the public subnet, and then the public subnet through the router will go through the gateway. So you always have to remember this basic architecture in mind. Okay, so in the next class, we will start discussing about the route table, okay, and more importantly, the CIDR blocks and how you kind of look at a CIDR block notation and then translate that. Okay, we'll talk about that and then we will move on to EC2 instances. There is only one single task that I want you all to do. If you go to the very end of this lecture slide, okay, slide 66, there's an instruction to install the AWS command line interface for your computers. So whether you're Linux, whether you're Windows, please go to this link. And by next class, just install it. We won't be using it next class itself, but just keep it there, right? So we can avoid the downtime of having to install it in the process, okay? I won't be able to install it on this machine because this requires admin access, okay? So I will be asking you to do the stuff and then you will be doing this, right? So any questions, please email me. And again, if you have not met the TA, talk to the TA. There are scheduled meetings, but you can always feel free to reach out to her and talk to her beyond that time as well, as long as both parties are available. Okay, so make use of that time. Send me an email. Hopefully, once my electricity comes back, responses will be a little bit more on time and stuff like that. Okay, so let me come back from the dark ages, no pun intended. But once that is done, we can stabilize a little bit. Okay. All right, so we will wrap up the class here, and I will see you all online on Wednesday. All right, okay. All right, thank you very much.